ANC yesterday marched to the Israeli embassy in Pretoria to reiterate its support for the people of Palestine. Addressing the crowd, First Deputy Secretary General Nomvula Mokonyane said the ANC is calling for the Israeli ambassador to exit South Africa and for the embassy to be shut down. Now, broader calls to have South Africa cut diplomatic and trade ties with Israel have intensified following this week's attack of the Al Ahli Arab hospital in Gaza. Let's get a sense of how feasible these calls are by the ANC and what it means to cut diplomatic ties with another state. With diplomat and international relations expert Dr. Kingsley Makhubela. Very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, we saw the ANC yesterday out in the streets just ensuring that their voices are heard and showing its support for the people of Palestine, calling for the exit of the embassy in South Africa. What are your views around that?
Well, good morning. You know, I think sometimes the leadership of the ANC confuses the function of the state and the function of the ANC as a party. It's really unprecedented that the governing party would go and demonstrate and demand the shutting down of an embassy and to sever diplomatic relations. If really that's what the ANC wants to do, they can certainly instruct their deployees, that they keep on telling us to say this is what you need to do. Having said that, I think on the substance of the issue, I think diplomacy, the ANC does not understand the function of diplomacy. Really, I don't support the idea of cutting diplomatic relations with Israel. I think we need to keep on engaging at the diplomatic level. As we are talking now, the president is in Egypt, invited by President El-Sisi to attend the summit there, the summit on peace in the Middle East and looking into issues of de-escalation. How do you do that? You have your president on the ground to attend to a peace, and this side you say, let's cut diplomatic relations. Diplomacy is an instrument of the state that the state ought to use. I don't think we really grasping and understanding how to use this diplomatic tool.
What would the implications be if the route was to cut diplomatic relations? Because you speak about a lack of understanding on what that essentially means.
That's a decision to be taken by the state. And in this case, the government can decide to say from now we're cutting our diplomatic relations with Israel. We give them 72 hours to back and do that. They can decide to do that. They're entirely free to do that. But would that be feasible? Is that something that is desirable? Is something that would really advance the interests of the Republic? I don't think so. Everyone now is trying to re-establish diplomatic relations with Israel precisely to be able to influence the Israelis in terms of what is going on there. And I think we're cutting ourselves out. We're speaking to one party to the conflict. And I think you may have seen during the week Minister Pando saying that she spoke to Hamas leader.
Yes.
That's correct. Speak to all parties involved in the conflict. Qatar, as we're talking, they have offices of Hamas in Qatar. And they've explained to Secretary Blinken that their view is that they should keep contact with Hamas to be able to influence the process. We are cutting one party to the conflict. We are thinking that we don't need to talk to them. I mean, I listened to Nomvula Mokonyane saying the Israelis did not even come out to accept the memorandum that they were going to give up. How they have a platform where they can give any form of a memorandum as the governing party. Unlike to go and demonstrate outside. If I was the Israeli ambassador, I would have done the same thing. I would have ignored them because they've decided to really close down a viable channel for communication.
Yeah, absolutely. We also have, of course, seeing the growing calls nationally and internationally for Israel to cease fire against Palestinians and to open water and electricity supplies. I mean, that's what we've been hearing as the call there. Where does the ICC fit in? We know that Durka has also been in contact with them, but on a bigger scale, what role can they play in terms of accountability and intervention?
You know, Mpo, there's a different discourse going on, particularly in the academia, around the role of the ICC and conflict resolution. Most scholars in conflict resolution, they advocate a view that says, resolve the conflict. Start to mediate with people and resolve the conflict. And the more you really put on the ground the ICC to say, look into war crimes, you are unlikely to find a solution. The conflict is likely to be protracted. How would anyone who has committed atrocities in a conflict sit down and resolve the conflict and resolve their negotiation actually going straight to jail? It's actually create intractability in the conflict. And there's been a lot of studies that really show that really bringing these two issues at the same time creates a huge, huge problem. We in our country here, we avoided that process because had we started from the beginning during the negotiation and said all those who are involved in apartheid must be charged, must go to prison, wouldn't have negotiated for a settlement. They would have really entrenched themselves because there's no way you'd expect people to negotiate their own one-way tickets to prison.
We heard Minister Pandor speaking, as you speak about solutions, saying that there should be a two-state solution to the conflict. What would you believe to embody such a two-state solution? What would it need to look at?
The two-state solution, it's an old agreement.
Yeah.
When the State of Israel was created, there was a Palestine and the State of Israel. And there were borders that were decided in 1967 in terms of what would constitute Palestine and what would constitute Israel. And generally, the international community agreed in terms of this. But later on, Israel reneged on this, started encroaching on what is Palestine and so on. So the two-state solution, even the Americans, they speak about it, they accept it. Even though in certain instances they would endorse the behavior of Israel to settle in what is known as the Palestine territories. I mean, you've seen what President Trump did to allow the Israeli government to move to Jerusalem, which is traditionally part of Palestine. So there's nothing new in terms of that. There's a consensus around the world. The Israelis themselves, for a long time, agree on the two-state solution. It's only now that you're seeing a lot of far-right people within the coalition government that are starting to advocate for a one-state, that this two-state solution is not viable and so on. It's a new phenomenon that is starting to creep in the discourse in terms of the resolution of this conflict.
Yeah. And Nomvula Mokonyane mentioning yesterday, as they were outside the embassy there, that BRICS needs to be involved, commending Russian President Vladimir Putin for his assertions and what he's had to say. How much of a role can the BRICS play in in the move around solidarity when it comes to this matter?
Well, you know, the question of solidarity, that's why let's define the question of general popular solidarity with whichever party that is there in the conflict. It's something that has to take place at the civil society level. But at the governmental level, the focus must be to use the instruments of diplomacy to resolve the conflict. That's why those who define diplomacy, they are saying it's very innocuous, it's continuous negotiation, it's harmless. And once you start to see war, it means diplomacy has failed. And you have to go back to the drawing board. I think an entity like BRICS, it's unlikely to play a crucial role because the biggest powers that are involved, that have a swaying power in the conflict, are not in the BRICS. The United States, United Kingdom, all the G7 countries, they have a big sway in terms of Israel and putting pressure. I mean, yesterday, the Minister of Defense, Gallant, was briefing a committee of the Knesset, where he said the decision to allow humanitarian trucks into Gaza was the American decision. And he says, who are we to refuse what the Americans are saying? Because they give us weapons. That's what Gallant was briefing a committee of the Knesset. So it tells you where the swaying power is. And this discussion that is taking place in Egypt, major powers are not involved in that. People who can really play a critical role in the resolution of the conflict are not there. They've sent their representative. The United States is not even participating in that. That's the latest that I have.
And how do you think that now affects South Africa's relations with the U.S., especially after, President Cyril Ramaphosa having met with Biden and discussed several aspects of steering South Africa forward and strengthening relations?
We should, and I think all South Africans, we should be alive to the fact that we have differences with all major powers in terms of policy and approaches. And we should be able to coexist. It doesn't mean that if we have different of approach with respect to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it must affect our relations with the Americans. And I don't think Americans will see it in that way too. They would understand that there are areas where we don't agree, but there are areas where we agree. And I think here there's been a tendency around the discourse to say if we do this, we're upsetting the Americans. The Americans are not upset. They understand how diplomacy is conducted. They understand that they can't entirely agree with us on everything. They also understand that even within their alliance partners, they don't agree with everyone. But there are fundamental issues where they agree, where they can cooperate. And I think that's the issue. Yeah. That there are areas where we have some level of convergence with the Americans, and we must cooperate on areas that we agree on.
You mentioned something quite interesting just now. You spoke about the function of the state versus the function of the ANC, where we're hearing two different, solutions here or suggestions to this problem. What then does that tell us? Is it a matter of strategy, or is it perhaps a meeting of minds that needs to happen, or positioning ahead of elections?
No, I think is the ANC not understanding that they are in power. They don't understand how to use the instruments of power to advocate what they want to do as the ruling party. And that's why you would see in the country ministers, MEC going to demonstrate against crime when they have the power to stop crime. So I always say they don't understand what is the function of power and how to use the instruments of power to effect change. The ANC is in government, and they could have a discussion with the Israeli ambassador around the table to say this is how we view things, this is how we think we can contribute, these are things that we object, and share ideas, not demonstrating. It's not going to help at the diplomatic level. That's the responsibility of civil society, ordinary people like me and you, who don't have access to the levers of power that we can go and demonstrate. So we conflate in these issues. And that's why we're quite quick to say, let's stop diplomatic relations. Do we really understand the implication that that would have? Do we really understand that we are actually shutting ourselves out in terms of playing any meaningful role? Because we keep on saying our foreign policy is to create a better world. And creating a better world, you must deal with all the parties involved in making this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Thanks for weighing in. Former diplomat and international relations expert Dr. Kingsley Makhubela there, speaking about the role of the ANC when it comes to the positioning on this Israel-Gaza matter.